The little girl walked into Callum Voss's restaurant like she owned it. Not the nervous shuffle of a child who'd wandered in by accident, not the wide-eyed freeze of someone who'd pushed the wrong door. She walked straight through the mahogany entrance of Voss, the most exclusive private dining establishment in Vancouver, past the maitre d' who was too stunned to move, past 2 tables of men who went quiet at the sight of her, and stopped directly in front of the corner booth, where Callum Voss sat having dinner with 3 associates who collectively owed him more money than most people would ever see in their lifetimes. She was small, maybe 7, maybe 8, dark hair pulled into 2 uneven braids, one higher than the other like she'd done them herself in a mirror. Her jacket was too thin for November, her sneakers had a crack along the left sole, and she stood there looking at Callum with the kind of absolute certainty that most grown men never managed to hold in his presence. Are you Callum Voss? She asked. The table went very still. Callum had not survived 20 years building an empire across Western Canada. Real estate on the surface, something older and quieter underneath. By losing his composure in public, he set down his fork. He looked at the girl. Something in his chest moved in a way he didn't immediately recognize. Who are you? He said. She reached into the front pocket of her jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It had been folded and unfolded so many times the creases had gone soft, the paper worn thin at the corners. She held it out to him across the table without flinching. My name is Juniper, she said. My mom told me to find you. Callum's associates excused themselves without being asked. They had been around him long enough to understand the particular quality of his silence that meant leave now and don't ask questions later. Within 90 seconds, the corner booth held only Callum, the child, and the folded letter sitting on the white tablecloth between them. He didn't touch it right away. Where is your mother? He asked. Juniper sat down across from him, again without being invited, and folded her hands on the table the way a child does when they're trying very hard to seem older than they are. She died, Juniper said. 3 weeks ago. She had cancer. She told me before she went to the hospital the last time that if anything happened to her, I should find you. A pause. She said you'd know what the letter meant. Callum looked at her, really looked the shape of her jaw, the way she held herself. Something moved in him again, deeper this time, and he still didn't have a name for it. He picked up the letter. The handwriting was Sylvie's. He recognized it instantly, small, precise, leaning slightly to the left. He'd seen that handwriting on birthday cards he wasn't supposed to have kept, on a note slipped under his office door 11 years ago that had changed everything the first time. Callum, the letter began, I know this is not how you would have wanted to find out. I know that doesn't make it easier. Her name is Juniper. She's 8 years old. She has your eyes and she doesn't know it yet. And I've spent 8 years being grateful for that, because it meant she was mine in a way I didn't have to share. I was selfish. I know. I'm asking you to forgive me for it, even though I won't be there to hear your answer. She doesn't know about you. She knows you exist. She knows your name, but she doesn't know what you are to her. I left that for you to decide. I didn't have the right to make that choice for both of you. There's a birthmark on her left shoulder blade, small, crescent-shaped. You have one too. I don't know if you ever noticed. I noticed everything. Please don't let her go into the system, please. That's the only thing I'm asking. Sylvie. Callum set the letter down. He was aware that his hand was not entirely steady. Across the table, Juniper was watching him with those dark, serious eyes that he now understood, with a certainty that settled into him like stones sinking through water, were not entirely her mother's. Can I see your shoulder? He asked. She didn't ask why. She pulled down the collar of her jacket, turned slightly, and tugged the back of her shirt aside high on the left shoulder blade, small and dark and crescent-shaped, a birthmark he had carried his entire life in the exact same place. He didn't speak for a long time. Juniper turned back around and straightened her collar with the practical efficiency of a child who'd learned early not to make a fuss about things. My mom said you were important, she said carefully, like she'd rehearsed the words. She said you weren't a good man, exactly, but that you kept your word. She looked at him steadily. Do you keep your word? Yes, Callum said. His voice came out lower than he intended. Okay, she said, and then, I'm hungry. I didn't eat today because I was trying to find this place and it took a long time. He ordered her food. The kitchen sent out what they had. Roasted chicken, potatoes, a small dish of the chocolate mousse that wasn't technically on the menu. Juniper ate with the focused, quiet determination of someone who hadn't had a real meal in longer than today. Pain. Callum watched her eat and tried to arrange his thoughts into something functional. Pain. Sylvie Marchetti had left Vancouver 9 years ago. He had not tried to stop her. They had not been together in any formal sense. What they'd had was complicated by the world Callum occupied and Sylvie's absolute refusal to live inside it. She had been a translator, freelance, brilliant at 6 languages, and quietly contemptuous of how Callum used the world. She had loved him anyway, for almost 3 years, and then she'd stopped. Pain. He had told himself it was cleaner that way. Pain. He understood now that he'd been wrong about what clean meant. Pain. Where have you been staying, he asked, since your mother? Pain. With our neighbor Mrs. Okafor, Juniper said, not looking up from the mousse. She said I could stay until someone came for me. She doesn't have a lot of room. A pause. She has 4 cats. Pain. Do you like cats? Pain. Juniper considered this seriously. One of them, the gray one, the others are suspicious of me. Pain. Callum almost said something. He stopped himself. He was not accustomed to this. To conversations that moved in such small, honest increments that required no reading between lines, no calculating the angle of what someone wanted. The child simply said what was true. It was deeply disorienting. Pain. I'm going to need to make some arrangements, he said finally. Tonight you'll stay here. There's a suite upstairs. We'll get you settled. Tomorrow. Pain. You're not going to send me away? She said it quickly, like she'd been holding it in since she walked through the door. Pain. No, Callum said. Pain. She nodded once slowly and looked back at her plate, but something in the set of her shoulders had changed. Some fraction of tension he hadn't noticed until it was gone. Pain. The next 72 hours were the most logistically chaotic of Callum's adult life, which was saying something, considering he had once managed a hostile takeover of 3 overlapping property portfolios during a blizzard that shut down the lower mainland for 4 days. Pain. He had lawyers, but none of them handled family law. He called in favors to find someone who did. He called Mrs. Okafor, a stout Yoruba woman with iron-gray hair and absolutely no patience for what she clearly considered Callum's delayed arrival to a responsibility he should have known about, who gave him Juniper's things in 2 garbage bags and a single tote with a broken handle, and then looked at him for a long moment at her doorway before saying, "She's been very brave. Don't waste it." Pain. He didn't know what to do with that. He carried it around for days. Pain. There were forms and processes and a social worker named Trish, who visited the penthouse and asked Juniper questions in the careful, cheerful voice that Callum recognized as professional neutrality, and Juniper clearly recognized as being talked down to, which she tolerated with polite patience and not a millimeter more. Trish told Callum afterward, in the kitchen, that the girl was remarkably self-possessed for her age. Pain. She's had to be, Callum said. It came out with more edge than he intended. Pain. Trish gave him a look. The DNA confirmation takes 2 weeks. In the meantime, temporary guardianship paperwork is underway. Are you prepared for what that means, practically speaking? Pain. I'm not unprepared. Pain. Mr. Voss, practically speaking means school enrollment, medical records, someone available between 8 a.m. and 3 p.m., or arrangements for someone else to be. It means bedtime routines and food she'll actually eat, and knowing what to do when she's sick or scared or, and this one is important, when she's fine and doesn't need anything from you at all and you still have to be present. Pain. He looked at her. I understand what raising a child involves. Pain. Trish looked back at him with the expression of someone who had heard that sentence many times from people who did not in fact understand. Pain. She was probably not wrong, he knew it. He ordered furniture for the 2nd bedroom that same afternoon. Pain. Juniper was not easy. Pain. He had not expected easy. He didn't want easy, didn't trust it, but he hadn't anticipated the specific difficulty of a child who was self-sufficient in all the ways that meant she'd learned not to ask for things. She didn't ask for help with her braids, so she kept doing them uneven. She didn't ask for different food when she didn't like something, so she ate around the parts she didn't want and said nothing. Pain. She didn't ask him to come say goodnight, so he would find out at 9:30, 10 o'clock that she'd been lying in the dark for an hour. Pain. He started knocking on her door anyway. Pain. The first few times she seemed surprised. The 4th time she said, "You don't have to," in the careful tone she used for things she actually wanted. Pain. I know, he said. Pain. He sat on the edge of the chair by her desk, not on the bed. He was careful about that, about the gradations of closeness that had to be earned. and sometimes she talked and sometimes she didn't. She told him about a book she was reading. She told him about her mother's laugh, which she described as loud and kind of embarrassing in public, but really good at home. She told him that she'd wanted a dog for 2 years, but they moved too much, and that she'd decided she didn't want one anymore, because she didn't want to want things she couldn't have. That one he carried around too for longer. There was a night in the 3rd week, a Tuesday, nothing special about it, when Callum was in his office at 11 p.m. reviewing a contract dispute and heard a sound from down the hall. Not crying, exactly, something quieter. He found Juniper sitting on the floor of the bathroom, with her knees pulled up and her face pressed against them, and for a moment he stood in the doorway, not knowing what any of the right things were. He sat down on the tile floor next to her. He was 43 years old and wearing a dress shirt, and his back was going to regret this, but he sat down anyway. She didn't look up. I keep forgetting, she said into her knees. Her voice was muffled and small. I wake up and for like 2 seconds I forget, and then I remember, and I don't know. It keeps happening. I know, he said. He didn't say it gets better, or she's in a good place now, or any of the other things people had said to him when he'd lost people, things that were meant kindly and landed like furniture in the wrong room. He said, that's one of the hardest parts, the forgetting and remembering. She lifted her head, her eyes were red. Did you love her? She asked. My mom. Callum thought about how to answer. He owed her honesty. She was 8 years old and she'd earned it. Yes, he said, not the way I should have, not enough, but yes. Juniper looked at him for a long time. Then she leaned sideways very slightly until her shoulder was against his arm. She didn't say anything. He didn't move. They sat like that on the bathroom floor for a while in the kind of quiet that doesn't need to be filled. The DNA confirmation came back on a Thursday. He already knew. He'd known since the night at the restaurant when she'd looked at him across the table, with those eyes that were somehow both Sylvie's and his, and asked him if he kept his word. But the paper made it official in a way the paper was supposed to, and Callum sat in his office with the document for 20 minutes before he did anything else. Then he called his lawyer, then he called the school. Then he ordered the hockey equipment she'd mentioned once, offhandedly, saying a girl in her class played and it looked fun, in the voice she used for things she didn't want to want. He left the bag by the door of her room without explanation. She found it after school. He heard her stop in the hallway, heard nothing for a full 30 seconds. Then footsteps, quick, and then she appeared in the doorway of his office, still in her backpack, with the hockey helmet held in both hands. She didn't say thank you, she said. I didn't know you were listening. I listen, he said. She looked at him. Something in her face that he was still learning to read shifted, opened slightly, like a door that had been almost closed for a very long time. Can I come in, she asked. He closed the document on his desk. Yes, he said. She sat in the chair across from him, the one his associates never sat in, the one people positioned themselves in when they wanted to negotiate, and set the helmet in her lap and looked at him with those careful dark eyes. Are you going to tell me, she asked. What you are to me, I figured it out, but I wanted to wait for you to say it. He was quiet for a moment. Your mother wanted me to be the one to decide, he said. Whether to tell you, and when. I've been trying to figure out the right moment. He paused. I don't think there is one. I think there's just the moment when you stop waiting for right. So tell me, she said. He looked at his daughter across the desk. His daughter, even in his own mind, the words were new and enormous and slightly terrifying, and also, underneath all of that, something that felt, for the first time in longer than he could accurately remember, like an answer. I'm your father, he said. Juniper nodded. She looked at the helmet in her lap, turned it once in her hands slowly. When she looked up again, her eyes were bright, but she didn't cry. Okay, she said. One word, the same word she'd said to him that first night when he'd told her she wouldn't be sent away. He understood now that okay was how she said things. She felt too much to say differently. Okay, he said back. Callum Voss did not become a different person. He was clear-eyed enough about himself to know that wasn't how it worked. He was still hard-edged in rooms he needed to be hard-edged in. He still moved through Vancouver's quieter power structures with the same precision he always had. The men who owed him things continued to owe them. The machinery he'd spent 2 decades building did not stop because a child had walked into his restaurant in a coat too thin for November. Pain. But things changed in the way that things change when something real enters a life that has been running on function for too long. Pain. He started leaving the office by 6, not every night. Some nights he couldn't, and on those nights he sent a message so she knew, and arranged for Delphine, his housekeeper, to be there for dinner. But most nights, he started keeping the kitchen stocked with the foods she actually ate, rather than the foods that were simply available. Pain. He learned that she hated mushrooms but would eat them if they were small enough to pretend weren't there, and that this was not a preference he should try to argue her out of. He learned that she slept better with a lamp on, low in the corner, and that she'd been sleeping in the dark for 3 weeks because she hadn't wanted to ask. He bought her a lamp, he put it in the corner. There was a Tuesday in February, 3 months after she'd walked through the restaurant door, when she came home with a progress report from school and handed it to him at the kitchen table without comment. And he read it and said, "This is really good," and she shrugged and said, "It's okay," and he said, "No, Juniper, it's really good," and then looked up to find her trying very hard not to smile. He understood then what Sylvie had meant in the letter. "I've spent 8 years being grateful because looking at this child, this strange, serious, quietly fierce person, who had walked into his life with 2 garbage bags and a broken tote and an absolute certainty that he would keep his word, he felt something he hadn't expected to feel at 43, in a life that had been built almost entirely around control and distance. He felt grateful, too, for the uneven braids and the hockey equipment and the careful way she said, okay, and the fact that she'd chosen the chair across from him, the negotiating chair, and asked him to say what she'd already figured out, because she'd known somehow that he needed to be the one to choose it. She had given him that a child he hadn't known existed 8 years ago had walked into his restaurant and given him the chance to choose something that mattered. He did not intend to waste it. The day the permanent guardianship was finalized, Callum came home to find Juniper at the kitchen table doing homework with her braids, as always, slightly uneven. He sat down across from her. She looked up. "Can I fix those?" he asked, nodding at the braids. She looked at him for a moment. Then she turned around in her chair, quiet, and handed him the elastic from her wrist. He didn't know how to braid hair. He told her this honestly, and she talked him through it, with the patience of someone who had learned that most people just needed instruction, not managing. His first attempt was not good. She didn't laugh at it, exactly, but her shoulders moved in a way that suggested she was making a decision not to. He tried again. The second one was straighter, not perfect, but even she touched it once with her fingertips, checking. "Better," she said. It was the smallest thing. It was also not small at all, and Callum Voss, who had not been soft in longer than he could calculate, sat at his kitchen table across from his daughter and thought, "Yes, better." I keep thinking about the moment Callum sat down on that cold bathroom tile at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. Dress shirt, hard life, 43 years of building walls. And he just sat down anyway, 'cause a child was hurting, and he didn't know the right thing to do, but he stayed. That's the part that gets me. We spend so much time waiting to know the right thing, waiting until we're ready, until we understand enough, until the moment feels appropriate. Callum had spent years doing exactly that, making calculated moves, measuring every risk, staying in control. And then Juniper walked through his door with 2 garbage bags and a broken tote handle, and completely dismantled the idea that control was something you could maintain when something real was in front of you. There's a kind of honesty that only happens when you stop performing competence. When Callum told Juniper he didn't know how to braid hair, and she just turned around and talked him through it, that was both of them being exactly who they were. No pretending, no managing impressions. Just 2 people figuring something out together, one of them 8 years old, the other one trying. I think about Sylvie too, and I'll be honest, her choice frustrated me at first. She knew she had time. She could have made it easier, but the longer I sit with it, the more I understand that she wasn't being careless. She was doing the only thing she had left to give. She trusted him to choose, not to be assigned a child, not to be obligated, to actually choose. And there's something in that, the belief that people are capable of rising to what they're given, that required its own kind of courage from her. She made a decision that cost her everything, and asked nothing in return except that he keep his word. He did. I think what this story is really about is what happens when you stop letting the hardest parts of your past be the reason you don't show up. Callum had built a life where closeness was a liability. It wasn't cruelty, it was survival, but survival and living are not the same thing, and Juniper, without trying, made that impossible to ignore. She needed someone to fix her lamp and learn her braids and knock on her door even when she hadn't asked. She needed someone to stay. And because he stayed, he got to become something he hadn't been before. That's the thing about integrity. Real integrity, not the kind you perform in public. It shows up in the small moments. Ordering food for a kid who says she's hungry. Sitting on tile when your back is going to hate you for it. Saying "I'm your father" out loud, even though you're terrified, because she waited for you to say it and you don't want to make her wait anymore. Resilience isn't loud, neither is wisdom. Most of the time they look like one more evening knock on a door, one more attempt at a braid that's slightly better than the last. They look like trying again quietly because someone is counting on you to. Juniper knew that she'd known it her whole life. She just needed someone to learn it alongside her.